Notre Dame fans, welcome back. It feels like it was just a minute ago we were here talking with you. I'm Brian Driscoll, the publisher at IrishBreakdown.com. That guy is Vince D'Addario, our football analyst, and we're going to have a couple fun topics to discuss today. We're going to talk about Notre Dame and the transfer portal, and we're going to take it from a couple angles. We're going to talk just sort of like big picture and how Notre Dame needs to engage the transfer portal, then dive into some specifics now that we kind of have an idea of where Notre Dame's roster is because of signing day. Some of the positions that they may need to look at or should look at, shouldn't look at when it comes to the transfer portal. And then we'll dive into the interview that Tommy Rees had last week with Ryan Russillo. So Vince finally had a chance to listen to it. Mm-hmm. We've been able to get through signing day, and we want to address it. And we want to address his specific comments, but then also just some bigger picture aspects of that. So that is today's topic. So, Vince, I want to first start off with the transfer portal. And we've kind of said this, but we're going to just dive into it right now. And the fact that the thing that people have to realize is Notre Dame is never going to be able to treat the transfer portal like the free agency that is meant to be and created to be, and that other teams are going to use it for.
Right. Absolutely. And that's okay. I mean, Notre Dame is different. And frankly, that's why I enjoyed following Notre Dame as long as I have, is because Notre Dame is different. And the transfer portal, what it's becoming for many, many schools is it's free agency. It's a free agency portal, right? I mean, that's basically what it is. I heard somebody refer to it like the NFL. You try to fill some needs with free agency, then you go to the NFL draft, you fill some more needs, and then you go back to the free agency.
Right.
That's not much different than some schools are treating college right now.
No, that's exactly what it is
it's
right now.
It's transfer portal, it's recruiting, it's
right.
Back to the transfer portal. It's
right.
the same thing. And I would say that the NFL has more rules than college does right now.
Oh, they have salary caps, they have tampering. Here's the crazy thing. They have tampering rules.
Yeah.
I mean, there's things you just can and can't do in college football because there's zero leadership in college football. Zero. And that's going to be a focus of a future article and podcast that we're going to do. I'm so disgusted right now with the leadership of the NCAA and college presidents and just this whole entire thing. And, people in Congress who care more about being liked and being cool and being all these other things than they do about actually finding out ways to actually help young people as opposed to just creating new, wealthy taxpayers for different states, if we're being honest. So it really is disgusting, but here's the reality of it, okay? It is what it is right now.
Right.
And the way that it is right now, what people have to understand is Notre Dame cannot dive into the transfer portal the way that other schools can. And they're just things that no matter how much the coaches may want to do that, no matter how much fans may want to do that, the reality is as Marcus Freeman said this the day he was hired, and this is something that Brian Kelly spent so much time fighting against as opposed to just embracing.
Right.
Notre Dame's not going to change. Notre Dame's not going to all of a sudden say, hey, you know what? This is the reality of college football, so let's just go ahead and let anybody in. And if they only can transfer in 9 credits because they took underwater basket weaving and piano and ballroom dancing, it's okay. We'll let them in. No, because Notre Dame, unlike a lot of schools, actually still cares. This is a crazy thing to admit, right? Notre Dame actually still cares about developing young people.
Right.
I know that's a crazy concept. They don't just treat them as like, hey, you're our trying to think of our show pony or whatever it is. We're just going to come bring you in and use you for what we can use you for and then send you along. Notre Dame actually cares about students leaving as better people. I know that's insane to talk about in college football right now, but that's what Notre Dame cares about still.
And people
they're not going to change that.
And people have to understand transferring to Notre Dame is not an easy task, right?
That's the whole point.
You have to have certain requirements. Like, for example, if you're going to transfer in as a sophomore, you need calculus. Like that needs to have already been done. Again, I'm not saying that there's guys that can't do it, but what I am saying is it's a requirement. And there's a lot of schools out there that don't require that kind of thing. So is scuba certification included with underwater basket weaving? That's actually kind of impressive.
Very well done. But the whole thing is like, look, here's how a transfer process works. Okay. This is how transferring works. a student has to apply to the new school, much like high school, and the
Right.
school will look at his transcripts. The reality is you can't accept a transfer credit of a class that your school doesn't offer.
Correct.
Or doesn't have something similar.
That they can, yeah, that's exactly
that they could kind of say, we'll put it towards that.
Right.
So, piano class, ballroom dancing, PE are not necessarily things that Notre Dame is going to say, yeah, we have nothing like that. Like, that's not a real class. I don't know what you were doing
in Notre Dame anymore.
Right, but that's not a real class. Well, I'm talking about like college classes, because now we're not looking at high school transcripts.
No, I mean
they don't
have PE at college in Notre Dame anymore. All those PE
no one should
fired.
No one freaking should.
Are not fired.
No one in college should have freaking that kind of thing in college, right?
So because all those people are teaching high school now.
Don't even get me started on the gen ed requirements of college. Like, once you get to college, gen ed should be a thing of the past. You start focusing on what you want to major on.
I agree,
but then you can't string out a program for 4 years, and because if you just taught them what they needed for their degree, then
they're not going to be paying money for 4 years.
They're only going to pay school for 2 years as opposed to 4 years, and that that hurts the money. So, and I'm not hating on the piano. I took piano as a kid. I think piano is a beautiful thing. It should not be a class offered in college. Okay, if you want to learn
unless
piano,
you're a music major.
Unless you're a music major,
right.
But I would imagine if you kind of already know how to play the piano, but a football player should be taking that. And then does he show up? That's a whole different conversation. You're going to get me fired up, and I'm not going to get into
not going down that road,
right? But the whole point is, this is still supposed to be about higher education. And when a kid sends a transcript to a place like Notre Dame, they're going to look at that and be like, we can't accept that, we can't accept that, we can't accept that. And they're not being strict and disrespectful or snotty. That's how the rules are supposed to be. Like, if it's just a normal student and not an athlete, all schools are that way. All schools look at a transcript and say, we don't offer that or anything like it.
Right.
Can't accept that. That's how all schools are. Now, other schools are more accepting of it for student athletes because it's a business, right? I mean, that's the reality. And so, so when you look at this, people are taking the classes I listed way too freaking seriously. You're missing the point.
Right.
All right. I'm looking at the chat. You're missing the point. Okay.
we understand that there's fun stuff out
Lord.
there. We get it. But that
you're starting left guards taking piano and not showing up. It's not taking it because it's not helping him whatever his degree is, unless he's like Vincent, unless he's a music major. I assumed some of you would have known the difference in hyperbole and me hating on piano class.
Right.
So take a deep breath. Okay.
This is taking a complete left turn.
I know. But it's like, seriously, it's like you can't use an example anymore because people are just going to grab like, wait a minute, hold on. I took underwater basket weaving and it has changed my life. I
just can't today.
Seriously. So anyway, the point is that's how it's supposed to be.
Correct.
There are classes you can and can't accept. Notre Dame is not going to change.
Exactly.
They're not going to start accepting classes. They shouldn't. And so that's going to hurt Notre Dame in regards to some of these kids that are going to these schools and being put into programs that aren't really going to help them graduate.
Exactly.
Now, that doesn't mean that's true of every kid. No matter where a kid could go to Alabama, and if that kid values education and his family values education, they're going to demand that they get put in real classes. There are student athletes at Alabama like that. There are people that go to Florida State. There are people. Myron Rolle became a freaking Rhodes Scholar at Florida State because he valued education, and he would not allow them to tell him, hey, you're going to take this, you're going to take that, right?
Exactly. So there's obvious exceptions to every rule out there.
Right. But not every kid has that kind of guidance. Again, I'm the son of two high school dropouts. Like, when I went to college, they had no idea how to counsel me on what classes to take or not to take. That was a new experience for our whole family. And so not everybody has that. Okay. And not every kid goes to a school thinking, I'm going to transfer. So they just kind of do, hey, look, first semester, you need to take this, this, and this so you can focus on football. Okay, cool. Right. And so that to me is there are kids that they can look at. The point is the false thing that's been said about high school recruiting for Notre Dame is actually true for transfer portal.
Even more so.
Notre Dame has to shop down a different aisle for the transfer, or not shop down a different aisle. They can go down all the aisles everybody else is. There's just only a limited number of supply of the things that Notre Dame is looking for. Right. And that's the reality. So every time you see a kid enter the transfer portal, most people are going to think, oh, Notre Dame should look at that guy. Well, I'm sure they will, but the reality is a lot of those kids, it's just not going to work out.
Right. So
it's easier for transfer. It's easier for grad transfer.
There you go.
Grad transfers are easier because they have a degree.
Correct.
And Notre Dame can kind of just generally look at their graduation degree and say, yes, this has prepared you for the program we're going to accept you into. That's more of a transition type of transfer, just like high school. High school is a transition to college, right? You've completed your work in high school. They're going to deem whether or not that academic workload prepared you for this level, right? And so then you accept them or not, okay? Because you can create sort of a whatever standards you want. A graduate transfer is the same way. We're going to look at your, whether we offer this major or not, doesn't matter. What matters is the major you're applying for to get your graduate degree. And we'll evaluate whether that prepared you for this or not. Did you handle a rigorous enough classwork, course load? Did you have enough success in the classes you took that we feel you could be successful as a graduate program? That's how the grad transfer thing works. A transfer that has yet to graduate, you have to evaluate him based on the standard that you hold all your current student athletes to, because by rule you can't turn a certain class into another class and just because the way that it works for eligibility is you have to have passed X number of credits. So a freshman has to be have to have passed a certain number, of credits from your freshman year as a sophomore, right? I believe it's 24. You have to have passed 24 credits. Now you may take 15, 18 a semester, but you only need to pass 12, and they have to be accredited classes,
right? Exactly.
To then be eligible. And usually you tell kids, this is why one of the first things you tell student athletes when they enroll, if you're only taking 12 hours, do not drop a class until you've added a class. Because what happens is if you are in 12 hours and you drop a class, you immediately become ineligible. And then when you add that class back in, you have to now go through the process of getting yourself eligible again. So what they say is add the one class, get you to 15, then drop a class, right? That's one of the most important things you tell people when you get there, right? And so it's the similar thing. If you don't have enough credited classes for Notre Dame, right? So if you're a junior and we're only accepting 15 of your credits, there's eligibility concerns.
Absolutely.
Beyond just have you proved that you can be successful in a place like Notre Dame?
Right.
And the other thing is you're going to get here and you're not going to be on pace to graduate. Well, Notre Dame's not going to accept a student athlete that's not on pace to graduate. That's just kind of how it's going to be. So that's the reality of the transfer portal for Notre Dame. And it's always going to be that way. And honestly, it should be that way, because the bigger picture thing for me is Notre Dame has to look at the transfer portal differently than other schools. And this is something that Brian Kelly didn't like. And this is one of the many excuses that he's used for leaving.
Yep.
Is this? Well, we can't compete because to me it's lazy for programs like Notre Dame to do this. A program like Michigan State, a program like Wake Forest,
that's
a program
different.
They need to do that because that's their chance to go get some kids they otherwise wouldn't have been, because those kids are going to allow them to be more competitive. A place like Notre Dame, let's be, Bama's taking a transfer, Eli Ricks, right? But they don't bring on a lot of transfers. They're still relying on developing the players that we are recruiting. Yeah. Ohio State's doing the same thing, right? Now, other schools are just bringing in transfers left and right to try to compete. That's fine. But for Notre Dame, transfers are going to be a real thing. And it's been that case for a long time. Notre Dame has had successful transfers for decades, right? Even if you go back the last 10 years, Cody Riggs coming in from Florida as a grad transfer, that was huge, right? But Cody had put in the work academically. He took his academics seriously, and he was prepared to do it. We've seen, obviously, this year, we saw Kane Madden and Jack Cohn, and we've seen non-graduate transfers. Alohi Gilman was a non-graduate transfer.
Right. But he comes from a school that's academically rigorous.
And a family.
And compares to Notre Dame. Right.
And a family.
Absolutely. And so that's the difference. You're going to be able to get grad transfers in. But again, grad transfers are just hole pluggers for the most part. And it's much, much harder to get into Notre Dame as a sophomore transfer, as a freshman transfer, those kinds of things, which are going to be more abundant now because of the way you don't have to sit out a year, all of those different things. But can they get into Notre Dame under those restrictions? It's so much harder to get into Notre Dame as a transfer than it is as a high school student. It just is. And that's just a fact that everybody's going to have to live with. And again, as a fan of Notre Dame, if I take my media hat off, as a fan of Notre Dame, I like that. That's why I'm a fan of Notre Dame.
I wish more people would see. I understand the desire, especially from some of the younger Notre Dame fans, because some of the younger Notre Dame fans never have gotten to experience, being a part of a championship team or being being a fan of Notre Dame when they are considered the elite team. Vince, you sort of have that. You didn't really experience the 88 team, but you did experience like 90, 91, 92, and 93.
Yep.
And the expectations that came with that. And of course, people even older than me who lived through the, with Coach Parsegian and then, they understand that standard. And part of the reason a lot of people became Notre Dame fans is because Notre Dame is different. And there's a lot of people that want Notre Dame to just kind of be like everybody else. And to a degree, Notre Dame has to accept realities of the landscape. Sure. They have to accept the reality of the college football playoff. They have to accept the reality of they're really the only independent left now. I think BYU is going to the Big 12, correct? I feel like
that is accurate. I believe it. They're like one of the 5 schools that I think that signed on to go. So, I think that's right.
It's just one of those things where you have to accept this is the new landscape of college football, but it doesn't mean you need to embrace it. There's a difference between embracing it and accepting. Accepting it is, okay, this is the reality. How do we still stay competitive and to stay true of our mission, right? We have to stay true of our mission of what we are about, but we also have to accept the fact that we want to be competitive. We want to compete for championships. That's the balancing act that Notre Dame is having to juggle. Changing who they are is not an option, so it's not worth talking about, okay? Right. And it's going to make them different. But, I think that the thing that Marcus Freeman and his staff have to do, the biggest thing is you have to embrace that, right? And it is what it is. How do we use it to our advantage in the ways that we are permitted and allowed to do it? Which means, you're going to have to look for a smaller number of kids, which means Notre Dame has to embrace the transfer portal as a way to plug holes, right? Not as a way to turn over the roster because we didn't have the kind of year we thought we should have had. Okay, or we made mistakes recruiting and developing.
So now we can fix it.
We're going to fix it by going and getting a transfer.
Right.
Okay. It's going to be like, hey, look, we've had some injuries. We've had some kids leave. We've had some this. We've had some that. And we need to fill a hole. Cornerback last year was one where it made sense that Notre Dame was looking at a Caleb Evans. It was a need. Quarterback was a need. Kane Madden, that's a little different story, but hey, they thought they were getting an All-American, and I understand it. And I actually don't necessarily mind it. It's kind of like what we said at the time. As long as you're bringing him in with the thought of he's going to have to compete and win a job.
Exactly. That's where they lost me.
Right.
You know what I mean? I had no problem bringing him in. If they think that they needed depth, then that's their decision. Right. They're the coaches. They're in the room with those guys every day. I have no problem with that. Come in and compete, but don't promise them a starting job. And I don't know if that happened. I'm not saying that it did. Okay. Don't promise them a starting job. And I don't believe they did,
but in their right. Yeah.
But don't be unwilling to make a change if it's not working out.
Right.
That's what I'll say.
So how does Notre Dame embrace the transfer portal? It is simply, number one, always focusing on your own roster first. This is a twofold meeting for Notre Dame. Number one is developing your players. Number two, and this is something that was addressed in the press conference yesterday, is you got to make sure you're doing right by your players. So, look, do right by your players. What does that mean? Being honest, okay? Letting kids know where they stand. Making sure that you as a position coach and as a coordinator and to a degree as a head coach, it's hard for a head coach to do this because he has 85 kids, whereas Tommy Rees has like 6 or 7, including walk-ons. The offensive line coach may have like 18 or 19. The D-line coach may have that many. But running backs coach is going to have a little bit less. But the point is, you as a position coach, you need to have a relationship with parents. Now, you need to set boundaries when the kid signs. Here's what I want to have a relationship with you, but here's what we're not going to do. We're not going to have a conversation about playing time. You want to talk about playing time, you have your son talk to me. Okay, you come talk to me. but I want to know, hey, how's so-and-so doing? When he's calling home, what's going on? He's having an issue with his girlfriend. He's having issues with his roommate. He's on a room that's a big party room, or on a floor that there's a lot of partying going on, and he has trouble sleeping. So those are things that you need to find out that's going on. And a lot of these times, these kids aren't going to come and talk to you about as a coach because they think you just want to talk about football. So they're going to have something that Marcus Freeman's going to have to demand. He's going to have to demand that all these coaches start embracing deeper relationships with players. And he needs to hold up a guy like Mike Elston, for example, and say, if you're not doing it like that, you're not doing it right. I've been told Chris O'Leary's done a lot of that. Chris O'Leary's married and has a young child, but I've been told he's done a lot of stuff like that. Mike Mickens Marcus Freeman was doing that with the linebackers, right? And those things are important. And it doesn't have to mean that you're always bringing them over your house. I mean, some of these, like Tommy, I don't know if Tommy Reese has a house that he can have 15, 20. I have no clue.
No idea.
No idea. But it doesn't always have to be the same way. It's more about you need to develop a tight relationship, because if these kids truly believe that you have their best interests at heart beyond the football field, they'll come to you with more stuff, and then you can go from there, right? That's important, because what that's going to do is prevent you from losing a bunch of transfers. Because here's the thing you'll find out about most kids. If you're honest with them during the recruiting process and you're honest with them when they get there, they will stay way more often than not. When kids leave is when you're not honest with them. And when you tell them one thing at one time and then tell them another thing a week later or 2 weeks later, a month later, they're going to lose faith. If you tell one kid one thing, okay, let's just be real. There's a specific position group at Notre Dame that's lost a lot of kids lately. Okay? Here's a big part of the reason why. One kid gets told one thing, another kid goes in a meeting, gets told another thing, another kid gets told another thing. Well, guess what they do? They all talk.
Exactly.
And they realize they were told 3 different stories. And they're like, well, whose is true? And then they just realize he's just BSing us.
Right.
Right? And then a coach tells you this is going to be the case. You do what the coach tells you to do. And then you get to the first game of the season and it's like, oh, by the way, you're not going to be playing this week. What? Why not? And then he gives you some BS excuse about something he never told you needed to worry about in the past. Oh, well, you're doing this. Guess what's going to happen? You know what? Forget this guy. I can't trust this guy's constantly. I'm out of here. Right? That can't be accepted. Like, hey, guys, we're going to lose kids. Some kids are going to be so obsessed with playing time that they're not going to stay. And that is what it is. Okay, but we're never going to lose a kid because he didn't think we had his back. We're never going to lose a kid because he didn't think we cared. We're never going to lose a kid because we weren't honest with him.
Right.
Be honest with them, because you know what? 99% of kids these days will accept the hard truth. And people think kids are fragile. They think kids are soft and weak. And, I can't. No, kids want the truth. Even if they may not like it, they want the truth. And if you always give them the truth, most kids will stay. That's the reality. And so that's something that he has to demand, because when you aren't honest with them, that's when you're going to start losing kids. And we've seen that at receiver in recent seasons. So at the end of the day, that's where Notre Dame is going to prevent themselves from losing transfers, because the best way to avoid needing to go to the transfer portal is to not lose kids on your own.
Yeah, exactly.
Why does Notre Dame looking at the transfer portal? Why do they have to look at the transfer portal at receiver right now? Because they lost so many of the kids that were already there. If Kendall Abdur-Rahman, Jordan Johnson, Jay Brunell, and who's Lawrence Keys were all still at Notre Dame, we're not worried about the transfer portal right now. It's about, you know what? Jordan hasn't been the player we thought he would be the first 2 years. It's time to get him going. And part of it's his fault. Put your foot up his behind and tell him to get going. Okay. Hey, Kendall needed a couple years to develop. He moved from quarterback. Let's really focus this offseason on getting him ready to go, because we're going to need him because we're losing so and so and so and so. Right. Right. That's going to be the key. Now, that's not always possible. Sometimes kids, we had 2 freaky injuries this year, like receiver. They lost 2 kids to ACL injuries during the season. That's just one of those freaky things that's going to put you behind schedule, right?
Sure.
Sometimes that stuff happens. And, you had a big receiver class one year and they all leave after their senior year. Some leave because they're grad transfers because they want to play. Other leave because they're going to the NFL. Some just, I'm not playing football anymore.
Yeah.
And you're young and you're not sure. I mean, so there's always times when the transfer portal, hey, treat Phil Jakovic right, and you don't need to go get Jack Cohn in the transfer portal.
Exactly. And we're talking about a completely different quarterback situation at that point. No question about that.
So anyway, that's the thing is do right by your players, and the vast majority will still stay. And then you can deal with the stuff that comes up that gets them like thinking, like I'm hearing like a lot of things, and I will just address it now. Deion Colsey may transfer, Logan Diggs may transfer, Lorenzo Styles may transfer. I'm hearing all these different things. Number one is the reason we don't address those things every single time we hear it is because number one, we hear stuff like that every year.
All the time.
Somebody sent me a text message today of something Tom Lloyd put on his message board, and it was the same thing. Hey, if there's something that's got some meat to it, we'll put it out because we hear this stuff all the time. There's a reason we don't put it out because anyone that's been around a college program, whether it's covering it like you and I do, like Tom does, someone who's been a coach like I have, what you understand is just about every kid you have thinks about leaving as a freshman. Notice all the names being floated around as possible transfers.
They're all freshmen.
They're all freshmen. Do you know why? They're in their first semester or two of being away from home.
And they're homesick.
Yes, they're overwhelmed with the course load and all these different things.
And it's finals week, and, all of that stuff.
Always happens. Yeah. So there's a reason we don't throw that around because now when it gets thrown around, even when those kids come back, there's always that thing hanging over their head of, oh, well, he almost transferred. I transferred as a freshman. I left after my first semester of college for reasons that weren't necessarily about being homesick. It was other things. It was about losing faith in your coach. I'm not opposed to transferring, but if I put out every kid that was thinking about transferring, you'd be like, oh my God, they're going to lose the entire team.
Yeah, the roster is done. Right.
That's just how it goes. And that's why we don't just throw out speculation and rumors of every kid that we hear about transferring. If there's some meat to it, if there's some like, hey, look, this kid is actively talking to coaches about leaving, then there's something to discuss.
Right.
But but the problem is you have some sites, and then you have a lot of fans and different people that they want to like break news.
Right.
And they just throw these rumors out there. Right. And it's unfortunate, and it's like, have you heard this? Yeah, I've heard that. Why haven't you said anything? Because because if I went out and reported every single kid that I've heard from a good source that's thinking about transferring, literally the people would think Notre Dame's on fire.
Right.
And you know what would happen? Same thing would happen in Alabama. Same thing would happen in Ohio State. Same thing would happen in Clemson. If you just reported every single kid that's thought about transferring, you could you know what I could do? I could literally just go, hey, here's Notre Dame's freshman class right here. Okay, that's who's thinking about leaving after their freshman year. And it's like, and it's true every year. So, but the point is, when it comes to the transfer portal, you have to focus on making sure you're taking care of your kids.
Yep.
Treat them right. Be honest with them. Hold them to a high standard, and they're going to love you for it. Okay. Go talk to Oscar McBride. He'll tell you the same thing. Even back during the glory years of Lou Holtz. I mean, every freshman was like, man, what did I get myself into?
It's hard.
So the point is that's the most important thing for Notre Dame. Take care of your own. Then when legitimate needs arise, you can be more targeted.
Right.
And if you're more targeted, meaning we only need like 2 or 3, it's easier for you to find the right people. Because if you need like, hey, we got to find 8 transfers, you're going to make a lot more mistakes because you're kind of because stuff happens fast. I mean, these kids enter the portal. They don't enter the portal for 3 months more often than not. They enter the portal and they're looking for a place now.
Right.
And if you aren't targeted and you're scrambling around trying to chase 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 kids, you're going to make mistakes. But if you have 2 positions and you can find, okay, we need 2 receivers, or we need a receiver and a corner, receiver and a safety, whatever, right? And we're just throwing things out there. We're not saying they necessarily need those. We'll get into those. And you say, okay, you offensive coaches, I need you guys all focused on finding this. We need to be calling high school. And this is what you have Dre Brown with help with. This is what you have analysts help with. This is why Notre Dame should have a transfer portal coordinator. Honestly, that's one of the things Marcus Freeman needs to do is have a staff, and it can only be like, you can make it small, like 3-4 people that are part of the recruiting operation. And they work with because then you need to go back. Hey, did we recruit this kid out of high school? Let's get his high school transcripts. You may already have those. You know what I mean? And so, but you need that staff working together on just scouring the transfer portal, like who's in it today. You keep a database, all that stuff, to where when you figure out who you want, you immediately say, okay, these are the kids that are in the portal, wide receiver. You know, you can have a system that you just, hey, here are the yeses. You know, these are the kids that we could pursue based on, you know, the things we know about them. And then, okay, now then you weed that down because, okay, this kid is doing this or whatever the case may be. This kid's transferring because he got in trouble. This kid's transferring because he got beat out. This kid's transferring because he played and sucked. You know, there's just kids that you just check off. And then now it's like, okay, these are the 3 kids that we can look for at this spot. And then you go. The whole offensive staff goes in on that kid, right? Then you do the same thing on your defensive needs. That's how Notre Dame is going to have to handle it. But if you start getting to situations where you're having to go find 8, 9 grad transfers for Notre Dame, it's just not going to happen. Yeah. And what you're going to end up happening is you're going to end up taking you're going to be taking like Ivy League kids.
Well, you made a good point that you could have Northwestern, Duke, and the Ivy League as your feeder school.
And Stanford, yeah. Right.
That's not going to close any gap, right? To use a phrase that we use around here all the time. That's not a gap closing way to go about things. And it's never going to work. That is never going to work. You're still going to be okay. You're going to get good quality kids, but you're not going to get guys. Again, is it possible that there's a guy like that can help? Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
but not 10 guys a year. Mm-hmm. Like that's a terrible way for a Notre Dame staff to set up their roster management. It's not going to work. It's just not. Mm-hmm. So you have to have a different strategy. And I do believe that Marcus Freeman and his staff does have a different strategy, and they've shown that. So I'm not worried about it. This is more a diatribe towards the fans that are like, oh, get this guy, get that guy, out of the transfer portal.
I get it. I got no problem with it. I mean, it just understand
not realistic.
I mean, like, oh, maybe they should go for, and I'm like, there's a reason that kid went in the transfer portal, right? And that kid, and most of these kids, like the big name kids, they're not going to the transfer portal just, we'll figure out what's next. They're going to transfer portal because there's already been a couple schools that have expressed interest.
And a lot of those guys want to get out of here by the second semester so they can have spring ball, right? Because they're trying to play wherever they're going. So it's a very frantic situation, and this is the time where it gets kind of nutty. I mean, no question about it.
So we're going to talk.